Welcome to Mandela House. Just a very brief word about this series of dialogues that we do with our partners. Malibongwe Dialogue is part of a whole series that we'll be doing. We will be having exhibitions on Albert Luthuli and talking about his life and times as well. The Nelson Mandela Center of Memory, at our boss's instruction, must not seek to glorify him, and so we're creating windows for people that he knew and that influenced his life and that, whose life he influenced as well. So welcome. There are too many luminaries here. I'm bound to miss out one, so we're not going to mention all, including some, as Mr. Mandela would call them, some terrorists here that we haven't seen for many, many years. And so maybe I'd just like to mention one that I haven't seen for years, Mavi, or as we used to call it in those days. In fact, I don't know who the terrorists were. Were we the terrorists or you the terrorists? I'm not sure. So welcome to all of you. We would also like to acknowledge the very, very important role that the Apartheid Museum played in the development of this exhibition. It is actually was housed at the Apartheid Museum there. And is Amelia here? We'd like to acknowledge Amelia Potenzi for the work that the Apartheid Museum have done. And I need to apologize on behalf of Giselle Wolfson, the photographer who's going to talk to us about the exhibition itself. She unfortunately can't make it because she's ill, the dreaded flu. So I'm then going to ask Vern Harris, our Center of Memory project manager, to talk to us very briefly about this exhibition and give us some background to it. Thanks. Vern?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to leave it to the curation team to talk about this exhibition from the floor. I don't want to presume to say anything about it, actually. Maybe just a few words about our exhibition program here at the Foundation. With the Center of Memory and Dialogue steadily being put in place, we've been given a very clear set of guidelines by our Board of Trustees, is that they want us to aim at two primary audiences. On the one hand, a global audience, which has access to cutting-edge technologies. On the other hand, systemically disadvantaged communities here within South Africa. Now, some of you might have seen our comic series, which is aimed at young people. Our exhibitions are aimed at reaching people who don't have access to internet, transport to big centers, and so on. Two of our exhibitions are currently traveling in the country. One is at the Old Fort, Constitution Hill. The other is in Gunu at the Youth Center. And we're hoping that all of the exhibitions that we put on here will then travel to centers which are accessible to people. One of the big advantages of starting the life of an exhibition here is that it gives us an opportunity to consult with Madiba as we put the exhibition together. And in the many consultations we've had with him, two, for me, fundamental guidelines have emerged, and Ahmad alluded to these a moment ago. On the one hand, he's made it very clear that he doesn't want the Center of Memory to focus on him as an individual. Is that he was part of a collective leadership, and there are many, many voices which are not being recognized and given space. And the Center of Memory would want to pay particular attention to finding those hidden voices and those hidden histories. On the other hand, equally important guideline is that Madiba has said he doesn't want us to sanitize history. In other words, it's warts and all. And I think these two values are going to stand us in good stead moving forward. And I hope you'll agree with me that the exhibition in the foyer exemplifies those two values. Thanks very much.
Well, let me now hand over to my colleague Bongi, the Chief Executive of the Children's Fund. I can guess we can say we've been all co-conspirators, and so Bongi, happy to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Ahmad. I think that kind of begins women talking, I'm also happy to acknowledge that there are men in the room. Of course, one risks to say in words what we've already witnessed, which is we've seen the capturing of the 1956 march by a staggering 20,000 women. Can you imagine it? It's hard for me to imagine that number of women marching, but we did in 1956. I think it's important to also note that that march took place a mere 8 years after the Nationalist Party took power. So it was at its worst. And a year before that, the ANC had declared the Freedom Charter. And it is interesting that as an expression of that, it's women who first take to the streets. Of course, we do acknowledge that there had been a defiance campaign in 1952 and so on. But it's important that we sit today and we reflect on that march that shocked not only the apartheid regime, but also shocked the very people within the ANC. Walter Sisulu remarks, how could they do that? And that came from the highest in the ANC trade union movement. People said, well, women have been so repressed, this is amazing. But they did. And as we sit today, of course, we do not only want to look back and romanticize the past, but we also want to take lessons and move forward. And I think there are challenges today that would, if we reflected on the past, which my panelists are going to help us to reflect on those incidences, we will understand what the challenges are for the future and what is it that we're going to take forward. Malibongwe Dialogue is also a way of acknowledging the role of women. In a country where we know that there's almost a memory loss in as far as women's struggles are concerned. We talk mostly of the 1956 march, but those of us, of course, who came 20 years later feel that women have not been acknowledged properly. We do know that men went to Robben Island, and when we talk about political prisoners, all of us talk about Robben Island. Fact of matter is, not a single woman was ever in Robben Island. So in this sense, there's a memory loss there of what were women doing, except supporting men in Robben Island. Women themselves were incarcerated in prisons all over the country. And of course, the stories of Kronstadt have never been told. And I do hope as we begin these discussions and these exhibitions, we will also remember that the seed planted in 1956 continued, because otherwise we take away from what happened in 1956. As we say we're going to acknowledge women, I want to declare this dialogue open and want to introduce you to my esteemed panelists, whom I would dare not try to introduce properly in their biographies, unless we've got the whole day. Each one of them would take me a day if I'm to do it correctly, so I will not take the risk of trying to get to Sophie. Where would I start? I wouldn't know where to start. We have Brigalia Bam, which is disrespectful as an African woman for me to say that. Sophie is okay. Oh, Mom, Sophie. We have her here, and she has a lot to share with us. We have also Rica Hodgson, if I'm correct, with us to share her story. We have at the far end Sophie Williams de Bruyn. Welcome. And we also have, of course, Amina Cachalia. The stalwarts are here. And I will ask them to share with us, their own walk. And that will kind of just begin the conversation amongst ourselves. And how would I not acknowledge Mom Vesta Smith? It's hard not to look at you, Mom. I'm sorry, you're the biggest terrorist in the room. Mom Vesta Smith, and of course, Mama Graca Machel. We've always looked up to you in just so many ways. I will, as I go, be acknowledging as I go, all the women I have in this room today. And finally, I think I'm going to make a success of acknowledging each and every woman in the room. If I miss out on the man, forgive me. But I'm glad that the conversation today actually starts in 1959 when the ANC, when the men in the ANC hold up the banner, Malibongwe Dialogue. So those men who held up that banner, we would hope that they still remember that they held up that banner, and that today we again hold up the banner, Malibongwe Dialogue, and I declare this open and we start. This is Brigalia, where would I start?
Thank you for getting us all together. I think I would like to thank those who have made such a wonderful effort. We look great, I'm sure, on that exhibition. Some people have been lucky that they were able to retrieve their old photographs, and that put them at a slight advantage. Thank you also for giving us this chance to be together so that we can tell these stories all the time. I thought this gathering was only for us, the wise people, or those who are over 70. And when I came in, I was surprised to see the others who are little less wise than we are. But I understand that one of the things that help us, those of us whose memories are beginning to fade, is to interact with you, because the more of these stories we tell is the more we are able to remember more things. So I think it's great that you are here to listen to maybe some of our stories and not. But I have to share a few things with you, probably not related to the past. Last week I attended a memorial service of a colleague of mine called Sophie Mazibuko. She was a social worker by training, and some of you who know the organization that was very active during the 80s, the South African Council of Churches. At that time, the South African Council of Churches had to be active because a number of organizations were banned. So it was through the South African Council of Churches that we were able to support families of political prisoners. I suddenly realized that we had not recorded anything about all the activities of what Sophie did. In this country, Sophie knew every family that was in Robben Island. She knew where they came from. We kept very accurate files. By the way, we didn't have your other sophistication. And these files were always hidden somewhere in Bears Node's office because the police would come any day to find the files. She knew every family of ex-political prisoners because we had given them monthly grants, which we were very sad to stop, by the way. I need to say that, these monthly grants, because most of these men could not get jobs. And she knew every family that had somebody to be supported with a scholarship. I say this because I suddenly realized how important it is for us to record the history and the activities of women. And I made a vow after that we will write something on this contribution of this wonderful woman who for years did that work. Many stories she has which we at time I would tell, but I will not do so. When you get an invitation that says, come here, it's great. I said, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I'm in that data. When I was overseas for many years, when people say to you, do you know Nelson Mandela? I said, oh yes, I know him very well. Of course, you know, they don't believe you. And they would say to me, do you know Miss Ellen Kuzwai? Oh yes, of course, we're colleagues. Nobody believes you. Do you know Desmond Tutu? And so I lived overseas very miserable because people thought I was name dropping. Oh, thanks goodness, Madiba arrived in Geneva and I was asked to join his team because I was already at home then with Winnie. And I told everybody I was in school with Winnie at Jan Hofmeyer School. Nobody believed me. So it was great. So I just want you to know that, yes, I knew Madiba also. In case you think I'm name dropping, I met him in 1955 when we went to Tambo's office, and when I was asked to write something about Tambo, I tell these wonderful stories when they used to buy us biscuits You know the lemon? Yes, those were more expensive than Marie biscuits. Some of you can only afford Marie biscuits. So to go to this office was quite a privilege. And then, of course, Madiba being so generous, he knew my background because we all come from what was then called the Transkei, and my father was a member of what was then called the Bunga. Now, those of you who have read a bit of history, and one of the responsibilities my father had was to give scholarships to the quote-unquote chief's sons so that they can go to school. So it was in that context that he knew my family. Anyway, that's not the point. So I'm in the right place also at the right time. But on a much more serious note, I want to say three things. One of the greatest things about the past, I will not refer to events, was that because of the deprivation of information and knowledge, those of us who had been to school and were lucky, we did a lot of reading. And I want to encourage you, our daughters, that in spite of your busy schedules and email and everything else, cultivate the discipline of reading. Because that was the only possibility we had. There were many courses that Africans couldn't do, and so you wouldn't sit around. There were many books that were related to political scientists, people who wrote, and we smuggled these books. And this idea of information and knowledge is very, very powerful. And I want to say to the younger generation of these women, do that. We took care of ourselves. And one of the things we did was that because we couldn't straighten our hair, we used stones. I'm glad you don't use stones. But it was important that in spite of the busy life, women have to learn to take care of themselves. It's a discipline because women care for everybody else. They are very busy. But what is happening, which I want to pass as we were the women of the past, time management was our top. The care of the spirituality, of the being. I say this because people often say, what sustained the women of the past? We were sustained by the fact that we were able to have common values that kept us together. And it was that common value that gave us the basis for the spirituality. Now, I know that, when you are busy and you have to fight for BEE and for equity, life gets to be a hustle. And unless people learn the discipline of self and building the self, it's important, and also taking that time. And that's the past. That's what helped us to be still on our feet today, most of us, that we are still able to work. The third one that kept us together was to network and to know that in this journey you can't be alone. I think capitalism has always introduced individualism. And being away from the setting where it is possible to be with a family is that we were able, because of the deprivation, to learn to share. And unless people share themselves, they share the little bit they have. People laugh sometimes, our nieces and nephews laugh about little things when people used to say they are coming to borrow something. And when I go to my niece today, who has very nice clothes, I said, Tina, can I borrow your nice hat? She, Auntie, my clothes. Can I borrow this? That's how we lived. We were sharing everything. We shared food, we shared, everything. And that's very important. Sharing helps you to grow. And we did more of that. Maybe we're living in a society now that is different. But I want to say to us, we knew everybody. We cared for people. We had no choice. You had to know who is your next door neighbor. You had to know who is poor. You had to know who is where. And I want to say those were the things, though they seem very unimportant, that because on the journey of life and the struggle, you can't do it on your own. You need a group and others. And that's why people were able to, as they will tell you, to organize things without the email, as Bertha often says, without the cellular. We didn't even have phones. But what made it possible was to keep the communication on personal levels. And those were the stories that we want to pass. And one last story is that of Ubuntu. This idea is over. The philosophy of Ubuntu is great. Nobody talked about it as a concept. It was a way of life. And it was that concept of Ubuntu that also kept us going. It wasn't said. It was the values that we were able to retain from our parents. The values of family. There was hardly any rape those days, maybe I exaggerate. We always think things are, we exaggerate, those of us of another tradition. I don't recall, I was a teacher for a year, I don't recall a pregnant child in my class ever. But I won't go into those things. But certainly values have changed, morality and ethics have changed. And I'm not there to challenge that, but I do want to say we lived at a different time when people used to say to us, there are certain things that are not done. You don't have to reason, you don't have to debate. It's a way of life. And that's what we have tried to pass to you, our daughters, today, is how do we begin to keep those values so that there is a legacy you leave behind. Tina nikuthi sinishiye legacy ye values. Nani ke izenibe nazo ezo values. I think today you are what you are because we had to sacrifice, we had to leave things behind for you so that you are where you are today. And to say to those who called us, thank you for giving us a chance to celebrate our lives. It's important to celebrate because we will not celebrate on our own. Thank you also for giving us a chance to interact with the daughters of today. And I hope that you will have these clubs of the wise, even those who are not wise, and call us. Thank you very much. The reason I say this wise thing is quite serious. I've been recruited. I don't need to tell you that. I still don't know what it is. By the AU to belong to the Council of Wise. And then I won't mention names because I think it's rude for heads of states. One of the persons, I think I'm told, is in his 90s. But then he can't even see us. Because I'm the only woman and he's a man and the Council of Wise, how will you see me with my makeup? So anyway, so I hope we will keep together to share our experience and wisdom because you will not find it in any textbook. There is nothing. We can only share it with you because it's in us, the way we can pass it to you. Engos, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Slope. Well said. I think I'm going to change. Instead of us asking questions or talking now, they'll take the whole panel.
I also want to thank this forum for inviting us. Sibongile, thank you very much for having us here. I always look forward to being in the company of young women and those not so young, and my own age group. And I think we can help one another, we can share with one another experiences. My experiences goes, maybe I should say, in 3 stages. The early 60s, or the 50s to 60s, to 70s and 80s. The 50s and early 60s was the march. The Congress movement was the Congress of the People. The late 60s and 70s and 80s was exile. And then coming home in the 90s up to this time. The march, the 50s, when we were involved in organizing the march with Bertha Gxowa, she used to be Bertha Machel, and my colleague here, my friend, my comrade Amina Cachalia, and those that are not with us anymore, and a large scattering of women wide and far that are still alive, but are very frail, perhaps today frail and old. So they are still alive, they are all over. And when Brigalia spoke about that unity amongst women, indeed, for us, there was great unity in the Federation of South African Women, under which the march was organized, or the umbrella under which it fell, and the Women's League of that time. I think I was the youngest, Bertha. You were a little bit older than me, and Amina, you and I think you and I. But, yes. And I was also Bertha's bridesmaid. So we come a long way from. I used to visit Amina when she was lying.
I must have been the flower girl.
I was visiting Amina in a flat during the 50s, Amina, when you were lying at home. You were told by the doctors not to move too much because she was pregnant. And there was a threat that she will lose her baby. So she had to go hamba gashle. So we come a long way with our comrades and friends, and I'm glad and happy and grateful that we are still together today. And we support one another in our own old age and in our own week or our frailty. So the Great March was perhaps the highlight of my life. And I was talking to some young people here earlier, before we came into this room, Bertha and I, and we were reminiscing about that march because they asked questions. They couldn't wait to come here inside. They wanted to know there in the foyer. And I was saying to them that, people always ask us, how did you do it? Because they know, and we know better, that there were no resources during that time. No money, no resources. You are talking about cell phones and telephones. We didn't even have telephones to communicate with one another, to pass on strategies to one another. And there was no money to do the things in a great, massive organization and mobilization campaign. Where did the resources come from? But we mustered 20,000 women. Now the 20,000 women is small a comparison to today's numbers. You know yourselves that when we have rallies nowadays, the people that turn up at the stadiums are over 80,000, 40,000. Now this 20,000 women, for us, was a great number. It was a huge number. It was a volume of women. But we know, Bertha, you and I and Amina, we know that there were more than 20,000. But documented was 20,000, because those that were also coming were waylaid, they were misdirected, they were turned back, they were slapped. Some of them were locked up the evening for the day. Up to the evening they were released, just so that they couldn't be part of that march. So we know that it would have been more than 20,000, but documented and is 20,000 women. Women came from Port Elizabeth, they came from the Free State, they came from Natal, and so on and so forth, and from the Transvaal. We didn't have these 9 provinces. We had the old provinces at that time. But this march culminated from the previous march, where we only mustered 2,000 women. It was a build-up, because the women in the other provinces said that if the Transvaal women can do it, why can't we also be part of a march? And so they rallied and organized and mobilized themselves in their different provinces the Eastern Cape women from Port Elizabeth rented or hired 2 coaches, which cost them £90 sterling. And we say, where did that £90 sterling come from? Who was a kind donor? Like you know, today we have donors, we have funding and so on. Who was a kind donor that gave them £90 sterling? It was nobody else but themselves. And how did they raise that £90 sterling? They came to their branch meetings over a period of time, and in their branch meetings, the comrades would make tea, and they would have baked scones, the humble scone, and they would sell it to one another in the meeting. And others would take their, in exile we used to say local chicken. Local chicken means the chickens that grow up in your backyard, you know. They would take that chicken and make a curry or a stew out of it and cook their rice or their pap and sell it to one another. Others would crochet, others would knit, others would sell clothing, and so they raised their funds to come to the Union Building. In various provinces they did various things, but from what I know in the Eastern Cape, this is how they did it. And then they rented this coach, these 2 coaches, and came to the Union Building. We are also asked, did you not feel that these women will let you down? Were you assured that these women were coming? How did you know that these 20,000 women would be there? And we say to them that yes, we felt assured, because as we were driving also to Pretoria ourselves, women were waving out of the trains and singing in their green blouses. So we felt very happy to know that they were going to be there. And when we arrived at the Union Building, there was this multitude of women already that have arrived. And so when we got together with them, you know, sometimes we reminisce and we look back and we look at the times of then and the times of today. Brigalia said that the lifestyles are changing and values are changing. Yes, the women of that time had great values: respect, discipline, dignity, and commitment. I'm talking about the discipline because when we arrived, as they were standing in a great group, when they saw us and we chatted to them a little bit, they just opened up, because we said now it's time for us to start marching up the Union Building steps. And we were at the bottom part of the Union where they were all. So they just opened up. Nobody said, let's, excuse me, let me pass. They just opened up by themselves. And the women, the leaders, walked up, and they followed behind. And they marched up those steps, dignifiedly, graciously, and very disciplined. Some had babies on their back. On their backs, they brought their babies. They had their, what we call today the skaften. They depended on nobody for anything. They depended on themselves. They didn't say, oh, they were going to provide us with lunch. There'll be packs. No, they depended on themselves. They were disciplined enough to know that they must pack something into a skaften to eat up there. Somebody was asking, how did they come to Mam Bertha and I outside? Did they come over a period of days? How did they come? When did they arrive? And we said to them, the young ladies that spoke to us said, no, some came during that day, the morning. They arrived at the morning. For us here in Johannesburg, because I remember that we were in our headquarters here at Market Street in West. We had a basement office, and we were like kept women, you know, when a woman is kept by a man. The Colored Congress and the Indian and the African National Congress, we had very, very little money to run our organizations. I was an organizer. And you must stop me if I'm going too long. You said we must tell our stories. This is history. There, on the corner of Market Street and West, there is a building. And if you get inside the building in the door, there is steps going down to the basement. And when you get into the basement, it's a huge hall, very huge hall. And the African National Congress had a station, what we call a desk, and a portion of this hall. And the Colored Congress had another desk and a portion in this hall. So the Transvaal Indian Congress were given this place to operate from. And they had an office on their own inside. And everything that we did, we were helped by the Transvaal Indian Congress, because the Indian merchants of that time, they were willing to give in kind, but they didn't want to associate themselves with the African National Congress or the Congress movement. In other words, they were willing to oblige with money, funds, and perhaps this building. When we know we are going to give out pamphlets, and maybe we say we're going to inform 5 branches about something, then we will have 5 pages, and intertwined or interlaid are what we call what paper? Carbon paper. So in handwriting you will write the caption or and everything else about the notification of whatever. And so in one go you will have 5 leaflets. That's how we used to do it. The other way we used to do it too was the old Roneo machine and what they call the squeegee. Yes. We used to wait for Dr. Abdullah Jesset, or Aesop, Amina? Dr. Aesop Jesset, who was a student at Wits University. And he was the sign writer. He had a wonderful handwriting. And we didn't, all of us as young people, we are old now, but late Babla Saluji and Abdullah Jesset and Herbie Naidu and so on and so on. And sometimes Amina would come when she feels she's well enough to come, because she was pregnant. And doctor said she mustn't move too much around, otherwise she'll lose her baby. So we would prepare everything, so when Dr. Jesset comes from university, would come straight there, the discipline that you spoke about, Brigalia. And we will all be waiting for him, and he will make his beautiful sign writing on this paper and take the ink and put it on wherever, and then the Fiji will roll it, the letters. It will be rolled, and after that we pull off the top layer of that transparent paper, and there's this beautiful pamphlet. So from that we will Roneo duplicate all the leaflets that we need. And the young people, we as young people, those that were still at school, like Aesop Pahad and Aesop and his brother, they would come from high school. Some of my friends comes from the factory, and we will all, we would make all the leaflets is on a table, and we would collate them, passing on to one the other, until the last one will staple it. Then you have your leaflet. So people were committed, they were disciplined, they know that they have to go. We didn't know about the word deployment. They know that after work they will be deployed, and so on. The Great March took place. Strydom ran away for us. The women were very successful and joyful. The ANC, I don't know what Sibongile was saying there about the leadership, Walter Sisulu. The women were not recognized. And the men, the hierarchy, kept a very low profile about this march. They didn't talk about it, and we went on with our plans until the day before the march that leadership called Helen Joseph and Lillian Ngoyi to their offices. I remember Lillian Ngoyi and Helen came to Rahima, late Rahima and myself, and they said to us that we were called in. It was also late Albert Lutuli. Now they were anxious because things were beginning to appear in the press. And they were asked, now you women, do you know what you, but in a very angry spirit, do you know what you are doing? And they said, yes, we told them, yes, we know what we are doing. And you are going ahead with what you know, this is a very dangerous thing that you are doing, you can be arrested. And they said, yes, we know we can be arrested. And then they said, what's going to happen if you're going to be arrested? And Lillian said, she said, no, the women knows what to do if they are arrested. So Walter says, now what is this that you say the women know? What is it that they know they will do? And they said to him, no, when we are arrested, there will be other leaders that will take their place. And they seemed half-heartedly to be satisfied with that. But Helen says, we didn't tell them the truth. And the truth was that we had strategized and said that if the police comes to arrest us, all of the women will kneel down and pray. We didn't tell them that. Now when they kneel down and pray, who's going to wrench them to take them to jail? So this is what they said, that they didn't tell the leadership. And so the march took place. After the march, women went home, not trashing the Union Gardens. Because Strydom had run away in their anger, they could have trashed the Union yards. Those beautiful shrubs and those manicured lawns could have been a disaster. But because in their discipline, they didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? Because they had respect for themselves as women, and they had respect for their leaders, and they had dignity, and they had pride. And so they marched. As they came, in a disciplined way, they marched back to the bus stops, to the train stations, and to the taxis. What did they do instead? Where did they channel that anger in? Into that song, Abafazi. They channeled their anger into that song. Strydom, you have struck a rock. You will be killed. They sang and they sang. They didn't trash anything. I'm just trying to say that when you look at that time and you look at today's time, what do we find in our cities? That when these big marches take place, our people are beaten up, our cities are trashed, the hawkers' stalls are thrown around, and even their goods are taken. They won't think of channeling their anger, and you'll ask them. I've asked many times, but why do you do this? Why do you disrupt your own properties? Because what is in the country is your own. And so they will say, no, we were angry because perhaps so-and-so minister or so-and-so premier didn't come to take the memorandum. It was given to some junior person or to a middle manager. And so we were angry, and that's why we did it. But the women too were angry. They were also very, very angry. But instead, they contained their anger and channeled it into something beautiful, the beautiful singing. So those are some of the lessons that we should be handing to our younger people. Coming back home, being in exile, there we were under the umbrella of the ANC as a liberation movement. There are young people here. Kanya is one of them. She was a little toddler, and my daughter was a little girl. And Kanya and Sonia and other young people like Bongi and Jobe, Tandi, and the other daughter of Billy Modisi, they were the young pioneers, because we, the mothers, felt as we were in exile, our children are growing up. They are going to these highfalutin schools where it's still British education, where beautiful English are still spoken. The syllabus is English, syllabus, the Queen's language. And our children spoke beautiful. What we call in Nyanja, Nyanja is a Zambian language, the word says Apamwamba. And there is this Apamwambas. Our children growing up as Apamwambas. And so the mothers came together and said we should be doing something about our children not knowing our culture. And we assigned them to teach our children our folklore. And there was another uncle that joined them, the three, who should teach them our dances and cultural things of ours. My daughters, Sonia and Danielle, can kick their legs very high. They know how to dance in Dlamu and gumboot dancing and all the dances. They know it. So I'm just saying that we thought that we should steer our children in the right direction so that they know their culture and so on. And I, coming home in the 90s, I listened to Ronnie Casserol's last night on 702. And Ronnie was saying when they asked him, how did you adjust when you came home from exile? Was it difficult for you to adjust? And he said, no, it wasn't difficult. And he said what he said. And I want to say that how did I adjust coming back after being away? I think I left in 66 to exile, 1966. And we came back 1990. So the best part of my life was spent outside. And then how did you adjust to come back after all those years? And I wanted to say to you that it was for me a bit difficult because we had unlearned when we got there in exile. There was a lot of difficulties coming from a country like this. And so you had to start learning to adjust there. And then you started adjusting there and you lived that life. And then I can tell you a whole lot of experiences that we made in this adjusting, but there isn't time because some other people must speak. But just to say, I found it a little bit difficult to adjust as a grown-up because I had led another type of life. And I had got used to other things, so it wasn't altogether easy. And things have changed in your country now. We didn't have highways when we left. We didn't have these many suburbs when we left and so on and so forth. And what got to me so much was when I go to the supermarkets or to the delis, or I just pass and I get that smell of this fried foods and so on. It really got to me, because in Zambia, things were rough and ready. We would go to buy vegetables and we would find the truck just arriving with fresh vegetables. Potatoes still has the earth on it. Tomatoes have just been picked and so on and so forth. You go to a butcher and you want to buy meat, you find that the persons are just carrying in this whole ox and the blood is dripping, fresh things and so on. There wasn't all this, and so you go into the supermarkets here in South Africa, you find everything is pre-packed and everything looks so unhealthy and everything is so not fresh. It is fresh, but it doesn't look the fresh that we know and so on. So it took a bit, and I couldn't take it when I passed this delis, that smell. I wasn't used to the frying and all that kind of thing. So after some time we adjusted. And also I must say to you, it's very difficult with your own families. Your families that you left behind, and here you come back. You don't speak the same things, or you can't interact with them in the same way that you would have interacted, because their way of looking at things is still there, and you things that are mundane to you. So I'd just like to say that I would like to say to the younger people here that it's difficult nowadays, and we can't say to you that, look, live like this in the way that we lived. Meaning that we had certain values that we adhered to. There are certain things that we didn't do. It was just a no-no. It was just a no-no. And so you didn't do them. And you were disciplined enough to not do those things. And I don't understand sometimes when young people are told to condomize. I don't understand. Okay. Thank you.
Something else. Thank you very much. Just a quick summary so we know where we are in terms of some of the things. Sis has raised a number of issues on starting with the spiritual being, which is a very important element in our lives today. She's also talked about the importance of knowing the people you're with, as well as the values that drive. And I think it is in the values that drive where we're going to probably find the answers that we're looking for. It's not so much in the technicalities and the strategies and so on, but it's the underlying values which were also emphasized now. When you talk about women's unity, you also talk about organizing our own resources. I work for a donor agency, and I know kind of donor agency, development agency, but I know that when people have thoughts about how they want to change their communities, they immediately go to an outsider to say, give us money to change our lives. It baffles me. If I can't put my own money into it, I do not believe in it enough. So at least we're hearing that indeed, if you want to pursue your own dreams cannot be pursued, frankly, by other people. They can support you, they can help you, but certainly they cannot determine, and that's why our agenda for development is so driven from outside, because we don't set it. It's set by others, and the reason we do these things are also not about our own communities. And also, important point that she raises, it's a leadership that's on the ground, which I think is a lot for most of us to learn, is when we lead, we've got to be on the ground with the people. But we can't lead from high offices and hope to be understood on the ground. But she also makes an interesting point in saying a followership that respects its leaders. And I think South Africa has a lot to learn about that. We appoint people into office and we take pleasure in disrespecting them. And we hope to grow as a country. I think there's a problem there. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be a dynamic conversation going on. But But the dynamism of a conversation does not take away the need for respect and acknowledgement of people in their roles. And of course, finally, just the issue of commitment that she makes, and I cannot leave it without saying, and eating healthily. I was wondering why she looks so good. Spends most of the time eating healthily. We are quite short in terms of time, but I still certainly want to hear from the ladies here as quickly as in a summary kind of form that you could probably, Rica, give us your own take on issues, adding on what has been said, and Amina will immediately follow on that. Thank you, Rica.
I'm glad you said you were short of time, because my life is long. I mean, in a month's time I'm going to be 87. So I've been in the movement for almost 60 years. It's a hell of a long time. And so I've got a long story, but I'm writing a book. So one of these days, before I die, I hope I'll finish it. One of these days, you'll be able to read all about it. But to summarize quickly, I want to say this. When I phoned to ask, or when I was phoned by Naomi to ask to speak today, I said, what am I to speak about? And she said, well, you know, we want to give young people lessons to follow. I can't give any of you young people any lessons whatsoever. And the reason I can't is because you're all very well educated, you have degrees, you have ambition, you have good jobs, you've already made money, or you're so ambitious that you just want money. And we didn't have any of those things. I mean, I had a matric, that was as far as I ever went. I started nursing, but unfortunately I had to give up before I finished the nursing career. And I went into politics. I didn't go in, I was thrown in, deep end, you know. Is that better? It's too loud. Okay. I was thrown in at the deep end. My very first job in the movement, and I say movement in broad terms because I had a lot of bosses. I don't know who they were. Yes, that's right. I never knew who was giving me a roof over my head or food on the table, whether it was the Communist Party or ANC or MK. I was never sure who my bosses were. But nevertheless, I had many faces on bosses. I worked for some wonderful people. My very first job was with my late husband, who was the National Secretary of the then Springbok Legion. The Springbok Legion was the first ever anti-fascist organization in this country, and the second, next to the Communist Party then, that had no colour bar at all. And it did a wonderful job in the years that it lasted. It was for ex-servicemen, and the idea was to bring into civilian life the ideals for which the Second World War was fought against Hitler. To do away with racism was the main thing that motivated me anyway, and the idea of freedom. So my very first day, my husband offered me a job as a fundraiser. I said, I wasn't married to him then yet. I said, what's fundraising? I mean, I had no idea. I'd never done anything else. And he said, well, you go out there and you get money, because no organisation, as Sophie said, can work without money. And I became a fundraiser, comrades. I understood from Albie Sachs the other day, who was speaking to me privately, and said, Rica, you were the best fundraiser the movement ever had. Well, I don't think that's true, but that's what I mainly did. Now, the point was you didn't ask what to do in those, not the early days, but a little bit later. Anyway, I said, what's fundraising? He said, well, you go out there and you find your salary, that's your first job. Without, you don't come back with money, you don't get a salary. Now, I want to move on because this is short time. So, from there, the Springbok Legion threw its weight in eventually to the Congress of the People. I beg your pardon, to the Congress of Democrats. The Congress of Democrats was the right wing of the Congress Alliance, ANC, Indian Congress, and Coloured People's Congress. So then I became the fundraiser for that organisation. I was told what to do. I never applied for a job in my life, comrades, because my whole life's work has been with the movement. I never ever applied for a job. And so I was told, you do this, you do that, you do that. Some of the things I did, briefly, is what I'm going to now tell you. I did that job. Then 156 people were arrested in the treason trial, including my husband. I became the fundraiser for the treason trial, and eventually also the secretary, because you had to just take jobs. I mean, nobody else was there to do it. While you were fundraising, you were told you would take over the secretarial work. I did it. I think Mr. Mandela must have been one of my bosses at that time. Anyway, so that was that. After the Treason Trial Fund, there were far more trials happening in the whole country, and so the South African Defence and Aid Fund was formed, and I then became the secretary plus fundraiser for that fund. In 1954 I was banned, so I was never at the Women's March, I'm afraid, nor was I at the Congress of the People. But it didn't stop me and Amina's husband, late husband, from collecting all the food for the 3,000 delegates. If you remember, there were two famous banners in the treason trial. One said soup with meat and one said soup without meat. And of course it was the women who did the work there. Early morning they came, they had to wash and scrub out oil drums, but they'd make the fires in the open to cook with at the Congress of the People. And they put up trestle tables and they cut food to make soup with and without meat all day. And there was bread. There were lots of things donated. We didn't pay a penny for any of that food. It was all donated. From Yugoslav butchers who'd come over, from bakers who were sympathetic, from all kinds of people. So from there, that was 1954. In I was banned in 1954. Now then, I'll skip now, because in 1960 Sharpeville happened, and then we were thrown into detention. Thousands of people were thrown into detention, men and women. And what I remember only about that, or well about that detention, was when we had to move from the fort, we didn't know where we were to be moved to. And this is where women come into it, because I now understand that what we're really speaking about today is women. I wasn't told that. Where was I? Yeah? Yes, so when we were told to move, we said, we're not moving. We're just not moving, that's it. And we lay down on the floor when we were supposed to go. We were supposed to pack, we all women lay on the floor and demonstrated we're not moving. Do what you like, but we aren't going. Our families are all here. We can't go anywhere else around the country. Well, the police vans arrived to take us, the Black Mariahs, to pick us up and take us off. And they said to the matron, and in her favour, the matron at the fort in those days was an amazing woman. I mean, we had some hefty women there, you know. How were they going to carry us out? She said to the wardresses, you carry them out. Well, you know, I mean, it was a problem. There were 21 of us. And so these men came in their vans and said, we'll do it, we'll take them, you know. And she said, you don't put a finger on my women. Now, that I never forgot. Huh? Solidarity from all queer places. Anyway, so we were taken like sacks and carried out. I mean, I really felt sorry for the wardresses. Poor things, they were having a hell of a time carrying us out. And just threw us into the vans. Okay, we were taken to Pretoria, which is a real hellhole of a jail. I mean, the worst ever. Okay, then jail was over after that. We women started a hunger strike in Pretoria because nobody would tell us when we were going to leave, what was happening to us. And it was difficult for our families to get there. So we staged a hunger strike. And we sent a message out in Helen Joseph's bun in her hair to Nelson Mandela in the treason trial, because she was allowed out every day. She was one of the trialists, to tell them that the women had gone on a hunger strike. So then the men joined in their part of Pretoria, wherever they were. So anyway, that was just an episode I thought you'd like to share with me. Then we were taken to we went to other jails, but anyway, we finally finished up back home, back to what I would call normal life, but it was never normal. So MK was formed, 1961, and my husband became the first bomb maker. He had certain skills. He'd been a miner and he'd been in the tank corps of the army, so he had some useful skills. And he was one of the founder members of MK. So where were the bombs first made? In my kitchen. Ground in my kitchen with an old pestle and mortar that used to belong to my mother, one of these heavy brass things. And Jack was never a well man, my husband. He was always sick from the day I met him. Always had problems, but never stopped working till the day he died, and never lost his enthusiasm for freedom in South Africa, ever. Say that. Anyway, there was my son at 14 grinding there. One day one of his friends came in, and we were under house arrest then at this time that I'm talking about, and the friend said, "What are you doing?" And Spencer said, "Oh, my father's just experimenting, he's got time on his hands under house arrest here." So this kid was very good at science. He smelled the stress. He said, "My God, you can make bombs out of this, And he said, "Don't be silly." In comic number 2 of the life of Nelson Mandela, this especially for you, in comic number 2, Nelson's talking in that comic about the first bomb. They went to experiment at the Kurdish brickfields, and at first the bomb didn't go off, and my husband jumped into the hole to go and adjust it because it was his bomb. And then he got out, and then you see this thing going, and Nelson saying, "It's worked." And they were all safe. They didn't lose any limbs or anything. So, of course, that was difficult now. We were under house arrest. I could go out to work still. And now for my comrade over there, Ahmed, who can't use that word, I don't have an inhibition about it. I have used it for 60 years. At that time, we were doing what I call the Indian collections. And I wanted to say it for your benefit and any other Indians who may be in the hall, but for everybody to know, that at a certain period in our history, a very important period, the Indians became the backbone of the struggle in the manner in which they gave money in this country. It was never easy, it was always like drawing teeth, but they gave. And they, God forbid, you should never write a receipt out for them. So everything came in cash, and you wrote a receipt saying a friend or a very good friend, depending on how much money they gave. Anyway, I wanted to say that for you. Now, eventually we were told we had to escape. Jack Hodgson had a special job to do in Botswana, then Bechuanaland, a British protectorate. Unfortunately, we were in possession at that stage of British passports, my husband and me. Our South African passports had been confiscated in 1954. So we escaped and we got there, but now we had British passports and we're in a British protectorate. Wasn't to be. The Brits deported us from there to Britain. There was a kidnap attempt on us by the special branch while we were there, but anyway, we got through that. So it's been a long and dangerous life, comrades, but I would do it all again. I then got to England. Now the Rivonia trial had just started. I got to England and I had to work. I was all the time the main breadwinner. I mean, I also sometimes didn't get paid at all, but that was in the lap of the gods, you know. My husband hardly ever got paid, I think. But he worked, he carried on regardless. So somebody had to bring bread into the house, you know, and so on. So I needed a job, and anyway, I still wanted to do a job that was worthwhile. So I went to see Canon John Collins of St. Paul's Cathedral, me the atheist. And I had to prove myself first, I felt, and I did, well, by starting a function before I started work. And it was successful. We got Robbie Gxowa and Ronald Siegel to speak, and it was a wow, and people gave us money in England. It was my first ever attempt at getting money. I forgot to mention, comrades, I was also the secretary of the King Kong Committee, in case you think I have nothing to do with music and the arts. I also organised a concert I got the job, by the way, Defence and Aid Fund, as fundraiser for the British Fund, and secretary. So, dual work. So then, I think I worked there for 17 years. And that time, because thousands and thousands and thousands of people were then being thrown into jail in South Africa, there were less and less breadwinners around. The children were starving, the wives were starving. So something had to be done. Now the fund was banned in South Africa. And so we couldn't just send money in under our name. We had to devise something, and we did. I devised a very easy, but the agents that came over from Gordon Winter to Williamson never ever discovered how we were doing our work. We paid for all the trials, including the Rivonia trial. We saved all those lives that might otherwise have been hanged, those people. We sent millions and millions of pounds in cash, comrades. I used to go with a shopping bag to the bank to get the money every 2 months to pay the families in South Africa. And we got people from all over the world, not only England, Ireland and Holland and Norway and Sweden and Denmark and all over to write letters to the families individually and send money. And that's how they survived. That's how the children managed to go to school, comrades. You know, I thought, now, so I was told at the end of my talk with Naomi the other day that I must give lessons to the people here. As I said, I have no lessons. I never had a skill. I never, ever, ever applied for a job. Thank God. I mean, I would not have been able to say what I was capable of doing. I didn't have anything. I never learned to touch type. When I came back to South Africa, I worked for Walter Sir Lewis's PA. But again, I wasn't asked for anything. Now, what I'm trying to say is, why? What drove us? That's what I'm asked. What drove us? That's why I'm writing a book, so that I can pass on maybe some lessons to young people. You're not going to get anywhere in this country until you've got proper freedom. And proper freedom means freedom from poverty for everybody and for all people, and literacy for everybody. So there's something out there besides just money, comrades, and besides just yourselves, that should drive you. As, what's his name, Vuyo Mbuli in the morning says, go out there and make a difference. Do that, comrades. That's all I've got to tell you. That's my lesson.
Thank you very much from someone who has no lessons. You've just taught us big lessons. And I'm going to ask Amina to just add if you have anything to...
I don't think there's time left now. Anyway, there are so many stories to tell, and I don't quite know where to begin. And if I do begin, it will never end. So perhaps I would appreciate it if, Madam Chair, if you would like to ask the audience to ask a specific question, if they'd like to, and I would answer that. But to begin a life that began very, very long ago, and to have been in the company of comrades that I have revered all my life, will take a long time to talk about. And I don't think one should do it right now, because there's no time. I'll deprive you of lunch if I start beginning now and never end. But the important thing for me to say is that we in this country came in 1994 and we pledged a better life for all. And we haven't reached that yet. When I look at people all around South Africa, and I look at the rate of poverty and the growing unemployment, we haven't really done all that much that we are praising ourselves for in the last 14 years. We've come a long way. But there's so much to do. And the quicker we begin to do it, would be a better life for all our people. I lived a very wonderful existence all my life. I got politically active at a very young age because I came from a political home. My dad was already involved with Gandhi in the very old years of struggle in South Africa. So it was natural for me to realize that something was dreadfully wrong in this country, and that I've got to let it come right. It didn't happen like that, of course. I found myself joining organizations like the Indian Youth Congress so very many years ago, and putting up posters and dishing out leaflets and organizing meetings, and just doing basic activist work all my life, in the hope that someday we'll have a different South Africa. We were always divided and ruled by a regime that we would have liked to bring to their knees many, many decades ago. We struggled tremendously for that day to happen. It finally happened many, many, many decades later. But the important thing for me was, all those many years ago, the deprivation of women in our societies. When we were organizing, even for the 20,000 people that were going to go to Pretoria for that occasion, we found it I found it, and my colleagues that were working with me found it extremely difficult, because we had to do our organizing at night. And visiting factories in the day was easier because we used to go to a factory and talk to the shop steward and talk to the women about the march and about everything else. But it was the Indian women, the colored women, because we were so divided and ruled, that we had to go to at night mostly. We got a group of women together in Fordsburg and the old Vredendorp and Doornfontein and various places like that. And women used to come. The Indian Youth Congress were the people that picked up these women for us. And they would come at night to my flat, and from there we would set out on foot to organize for the 20,000 women that was supposed to come to the union buildings, or more or less. But nevertheless, it was a tremendous organizational period for us. We went from door to door to organize. And we had to do that because we had to get the permission of the fathers or the brothers or the husbands if their women could come to the August the 9th march to Pretoria. And as we went from house to house, the men would have come back from work or from their businesses or whatever they were doing, and the women, those that worked, were home, and the families were home, and we had to talk to them about the march and about getting there and giving them a pledge that it would be peaceful, that they would not get hurt, that if the police comes, we will take care of that. And in many cases, the husband said, well, you can take my wife along, or my sister, or my whatever, but you've got to be absolutely sure that there would be, nothing would happen to them, they would not be arrested. Well, that information we couldn't pledge because we couldn't tell them that they would be 100% safe on that day. But we told them it's going to be peaceful, and that's what we pledged, that the march would be peaceful. And they could all gather at one spot at the old Red Square, or at my flat, or any flat where they choose to come. We will find transport for them, or we will take them to the station and take them off to Pretoria, which they did. It was such an experience, that organizing. And for many years later, it stood us in very good stead, the activists, in good stead, because we knew exactly how to go about organizing our people in various areas. But the most important thing for me is not that actual march, really. That was a highlight for many, many of us. But when I went to prison in 1952 for the Defiance Campaign, that was a highlight for me, because it put me in the same cell with other people, and I learned to realize so early on that my aspirations and my hopes and my desires were not only mine, they were throughout the length and breadth of South Africa. All the women aspired for that. We were shoved together in one cell, and two cells really, one big one and one smaller one. And we were 29 women who went voluntarily to prison in 1952 on the 26th of August, the first batch of women that went to prison. And that was so important for me personally, because here I spent, for the first time in my life, I spent time with women, other activists, in prison, slept with them, ate with them, cleaned the toilet with them, cleaned the courtyard with them, which was absolutely spectacular. It was clean already. Boksburg prison was one of the cleanest prisons those years. But nevertheless, we had to get up in the morning and do that. But the important thing that I'd like to say is that that was the most absolutely visual sense in a way, because here I spent time with all types of women, colored women, ordinary women. Indian, we had one colored woman, Indian women, African women, and we ate the same food. We cleaned the same courtyard, and we sang the same songs. We absolutely identified with the new South Africa that was going to come many, many decades later. It was so important for us to live together because there was always, even amongst every group in South Africa, the divide and rule that the racist government had achieved. We never knew what, when I say we, it means a lot of the Indian people, not me personally, because I was privileged because I had friends and I had other activists that I worked with, but there were so many other people that just had a relationship with the sort of employer-employee relationship all along with people. And there was never an idea of getting any unity and any freedom across that perspective in our homes, in our areas where we worked and everywhere, because there was continuously this employer-employee situation where people just treated other people as workers and bosses, and it never came to anything else. And in our organizations, it was different. But on the ground, that situation, I think to a certain extent, it still exists in South Africa, in spite of the fact that we are free now. We are not equal yet. And our great slogan when we came into being was better life for all. And that has not quite taken off yet. Because we still find the great difficulty of unemployment to such an extent, to poverty to such an extent, that it's wonderful to laud ourselves of what we've done in the past. Goodness me, we've got to come to terms with South Africa and see that that takes off. When I saw a clip on television not so long, on Women's Day, I just come out of hospital, and there was this lady walking in Soweto, and it was asked, what better life has she had? She was doing her own thing. She was walking to work or going to sell whatever she had, and being poor and being disadvantaged. And I thought to myself, yes, we have failed in the last 14 years of freedom. We have gained a great deal and we've made wonderful progress, which we keep telling ourselves, but we also have become such a greedy country in a sense, and such a personal greedy country where we just want to amass money for ourselves continuously, and we seem to be forgotten this wonderful slogan, a better life for all, because we haven't really come to terms with that, not yet. There's still such a long way to go.
Thank you. The way I'd like to moderate this is to expand my panel actually in terms of responses. My Bertha is here. My Vesta is here. So as questions come, I want to turn this into what Mrs. Klipper was talking about, intergenerational conversation. We have 2-3 generations here, maybe 4. And we could have a good intergenerational conversation, having been started by the ladies up here and having my Bertha and my Vesta here to also be respondents on some of the questions. Mama Michelle, I think you come after. I think you're another generation. You don't. You're not on this generation. You're on the other generation. So we've got about 4 or 5 generations here, and that should be a very vibrant conversation we could possibly have. Starting with a statement: we're nowhere next to being properly free. And I think I'd add that to say freedom is not given. You can't have freedom on a plate. No one is ever going to deliver freedom to you. And I suppose some of the mistakes we've made as those who are in government is to continue talking about we're going to deliver, as if someone's going to stand at your door and deliver empowerment. The things you can't deliver because people must claim them. And freedom is just one of those things that you have to claim. It's never going to be delivered. So where we are right now today with Better Life for All becoming a distant dream for most people, especially women and children, what are the questions that other generations might have? Questions, comments, and way forward, in fact. Got one question right there.
Well, I don't know about a way forward. Hi, my name is Kanya Jede. I've heard so many speak of things that are different now from when you were all striving to give me the opportunities I had thanks to your sacrifices. But I want to talk about the things that are still the same. The reality of it is that we still hear, as was heard in the movement today, let's deal with the racial inequalities first, we'll deal with these women's issues later. And that is frustrating, to still be hearing that. And the difficulty in addressing the challenges that are still facing women in South Africa today is that in comparison to the amount of commitment that there was 50, 60 years ago, today we have the resources. We have the human resources, we have the monetary resources, and yet there's a sense of complacency and a difficulty in getting individuals to simply sacrifice a Saturday afternoon. As a lawyer, what we do is we try to get them to do that one Saturday afternoon a month to give free legal advice. You have no idea how hard it is to get lawyers to do that. They will commit to 20 hours a year of pro bono work, nothing more. 20 hours a year is nothing compared to the amount of work that is needed to make sure that we continue the work that all of you so arduously worked at for such a long time, which is our duty and our responsibility as much to ourselves as it is to those who went before us. And that's my concern right now, is today, how do we make sure it's easier? We're not going to end up in jail. We're not going to end up tortured. We have the money, and yet it's harder to get people to do this kind of work. And that's what fundamentally scares me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll have more comments, and we can have a conversation, in fact. The other questions will be directed here. If someone has a view, let's talk.
Thank you. I've got a cold, so my voice will disappear probably. I'm Michelle Reuters, and I have a question for now. You've spoken about 20,000 women coming together through amazing organization without any modern, technology. How do we get a women's movement started in South Africa again that ignores race, that ignores class, not ignores in the sense that we don't address those issues, but ignores it in the terms of bringing us together as women? How do we get gender to be the most important issue that brings women together? Because today still, women are second-class citizens in this country. So if there are any lessons that I'd like to get from today is how to do that, because we've struggled since 1994 to start up a women's movement in South Africa. How do we go about doing it? Is it necessary?
I'll take a third one, and then I will come back to the panel.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just want to add to the concerns that were raised by Kanya, but responding to what Mama Brigalia said regarding the value of sharing. As much as we want to be recognized as women in South Africa, but I still feel that we're not doing enough to share what we have with other women. there is this huge gap between the so-called working class and the women on the grassroots, especially women in the rural areas. I've been taught, I've just learned from the presentations from our valuable veterans there, from the parents, that we need to give because we grew seeing them giving. But I tend to blame myself to say, how much am I giving to this ordinary woman? Just basic things, giving my clothing. I've got 3 wardrobes full of my old clothes. And we've been taught in churches and in some places that when you receive something new, take the old one out. And as working classes in South Africa, how much are we doing to close the gap between us, the so-called working class, and those women in the grassroots? The second comment that I want to make and ask a question of advice is, how do we integrate this rich history into today's curriculum? Or just to visit universities, technicons, to share this valuable information with the youngest generation of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take a few responses. I'll give Bertha the first chance to respond. You want to respond, Bertha?
Yeah, no.
No, thank you very much. I just want to, just before I respond to the question of how, when are we going to come up with the women's movement, to also say in the team with my colleagues, one other thing which was very important to us was planning. What was important was planning. You see, many other people do ask us, why did we choose a Thursday? Women were very strategic. My colleague, my friend here, who spoke about the church, and that was all about the church. And Sophie just explained that we were going to say, once the police come, we all kneel down. And in fact, that's why we actually preferred women to put on their church uniforms, because at the time when the police come, we're going to be turned to a church rally, not a political rally. And we chose Thursday specifically because Thursday is a Manyano day for women in the whole country. And those days, Thursday, we used to call it Sheila's Day Off. All the domestic workers were off, that's why. So there was that element here, planning, and very strategic. Women were very strategic. Well, there's not enough time really to tell you the real things about that day today. But I want to come to this one of us, when will you come and form one united women like we did? You see, with us, the Federation of Women brought together the workers, professionals, the church, everybody was affiliated to the Federation of South. You see, today, my problem is that when we celebrate these days, for instance, so August 9, now government that came and said August 9 is a National Women's Day for everybody. We are too fragmented. Yeah. This one celebrates in that corner a small little thing here, and that one in another small Stockfell that side, and another one that we never come back together. I think if we can begin now to say, when we celebrate these days, I know we can't bring the whole country together, but at least we can do one and share these experiences and bring everybody on board. Everybody must understand what was happening with us. I think that will assist us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertha.
I just want to say, and this is very dear to my heart, the Federation of South African Women has never been disbanded. So if anybody wants to know how to bring women together, get in touch with women who were in the Federation of South African women. Thank you.
Are there any more responses from the panel? Sister?
I think that we are struggling with this idea that if we form a women's movement, then we are going to solve all our problems. I think let's also be realistic. I think the reason that women got together and it was a little easier was that there was a common enemy and there was a common vision. Generally, there were things that we all wanted as women. And I think that helped because of that common call. So it was not necessarily an ideological commitment. And I think it was not only necessarily because one political party had to do that. We have now 82 registered political parties, and it just makes me more miserable. Because it means it's getting to be impossible for women who feel that their first loyalty first is to their political party. Maybe the second loyalty then is to the movement. That's our first crisis of today, which didn't exist those days. The second problem for us, many of us who are related to the church, I come from that tradition and many others, there was a time when in South Africa there was something like 50 denominations. Today there are over 350. And so the loyalty is to your church rather than to the movement. So that there are new crisis areas that we have to look at. But in spite of that, I think we should try. I know because I'm here to sell this idea. Now give me a chance for me just to do that.
Go ahead.
Zanele Mbeki inspired many of us by sheer accident when we tried to work with the women from the DRC, where we were working very hard for 2 years. That we, in fact, in South Africa, found ourselves forming, not in a conscious manner, South African Women in Dialogue. Because we realized that after 1994, we are more divided than we will ever think. It was almost impossible for us to meet even those who belong to the same political party, even those who belong to the same church, those who belong to the same stokvel. And we were more divided on all grounds, class, religion, call it anything, we are just nowhere. So this is shameful. There must be something that we do. So this Sawit idea is that let's call it a dialogue, because if we call it a movement, we get into trouble. Somebody says, who's right, whose mandate? You have to form a movement. So I tried it when I was overseas. It didn't work, because there was no mandate from somewhere. So now we have, and I'm selling this, we have decided that what's going to help us to deal with these problems is to have a common thing, a common cause that is a reality, and that is poverty. So then we sent 2 groups, one from Tunisia, one from Chile, to see how they are dealing as women with this issue of poverty, because they have less resources than us. So now we are on this project, and we would like to invite as many of you as possible. You don't have to belong to any party, please come. You don't have to be any class, please come. And we are trying to see how we can work with our various departments. We were given an opportunity 3 weeks ago to try and convince the cabinet on what they call an integrated approach. Rather than one department going there to find IDs, they don't find them. Another department finds a school, and then something is there. Another department goes to deal with whatever they deal with. Zola Square, that's the one who is crying all the time. Yeah, he called last week to say, please stop, I've never seen such poverty in my life. That's poverty. So that's a reality, because you have all the departments and they are doing wonderful work. But the problem is that we are not resolving it. So there is something somewhere. So I'm just making a little to say here is a movement that dialogues. We talk to one another. We try to dialogue, because our experience, all of us, and the world over, you can't deal with racism only through the law. The more you legislate, as they've seen it in the United States, is the more it's an old thing. We find that in Brazil, they are worse off than us. United States is worse off than us. and those who know how the group works in England on racism. So we have to deal with it as we do things, because we have to deal with attitudes and stereotypes. But theoretically, I think the government has done everything in constitution. Let's deal with it. So those of you who want to do some things and give volunteer time, please come to us, Sawit. We will welcome your skill. We welcome your time. If you have a little time once a month to take one girl, please, you are welcome. If you are, I've also started a movement which was started by Stella. I'm encouraging it this time around women. We call it plowback, because we discover that many of us, especially my types who don't come, who are not born here, we have many of our origins from rural communities. We left our rural communities. And when we go back, we find that they are very poor than us, because we've been able to live in Johannesburg, in Pretoria, to get good jobs, to get BE and all those nice things. But when we go back home, we discover that the school, there is no nursery school, adoption of families. So there is a possibility, new things we need to think of, our new way of freedom. Adopt one family. When I was working in Geneva, they know, for instance, the Swiss families adopted 65 families in South Africa. That's all. And then yearly, I collected money from each and every of those 65 families. Very difficult to get news from home as to what is happening to family. And because they were able to educate 2 kids, once you do that, then there's a future for them, because with education. And so these are some of the things maybe we begin to think of, and not rely that Pando is going to find money for every child in South Africa. Is that, in fact, your 300 rand, your 500 rand, honestly, it's amazing in school fees what it can do. So those are some of the things that we can begin, all of us, to think. Not big scale things, but small. Because if you do it with one family, with one girl, with one boy, it's amazing that the thing it is. So thank you for giving me the propaganda.
Thank you, sister. I love that propaganda. There are a few young people who's got their hands up, 1 and 2. And someone else? I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'll close that.
Okay. My name is Stanley Manzini. I must say, first of all, that I'm overwhelmed with this meeting, and I feel that you guys have done a lot for the freedom that we are having today. You know, and I think we must maybe clap hands for them again. And I believe the biggest thank you that you would expect from us is if we take off from where you left off. Yeah. Even though you are still going on, is if we continue to leave a legacy for our children. Well, I'm in the engineering background, okay, other than the music and other things. And one of the things that you see with the women, we don't have a lot of women there. One of the things Mama Hlope mentioned is that they studied. They went to school. Now, most of us, we expect to just get things laid for us. We don't want to go to school. Someone once said, if you want to hide something from a black man, put it inside a book. Now, those who have studied, we don't share these skills with the others. I mean, for example, if you have gone and done engineering, I mean, you as a lady, take off some of your time and go to those rural areas and educate some kids. But most of us, we expect to be given money to go and do that. With my wife, we have gone to the rural areas where you say, I don't expect someone to give me money, but I will use what I have to get what I don't have. They didn't have money, but they had talent. And they used that talent to get what they didn't have. And I would just like to encourage each and everyone here that, you know, if you can learn and strive for perfection and strive for doing good, money will just follow. And it doesn't take a lot of money to please other people. I mean, like I say, for example, our kids here in Joburg, in town, we pay 500, 1,000 rand a month to take them to school. But you go to the rural areas, the kids are paying 50 rand a month. So if you can just decide that for just this one time, I'm going to donate 1,000 rand, that will support 10 kids and it will pay for their school fees for the whole year. Just one person. So there are many other ways in which we can help. And one of them is to plow back to our community, those that are privileged, and to continue to study. We mustn't stop with what we have and say, we're going to get some funding from so and so. Most of us, we want to continue and fund other people, but where do we get that money? Use what you have to get what you don't have. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Tandy, and the few things that I've picked up from them is that whatever they did it out of nothing. And it was the initiative that they had. Nobody asked them to do it. And as women, sometimes we wait for someone to do something for us. I know sometimes that we can blame the background and say it's how I grew up, because women sometimes as girls, you are brought up being this little princess who's waiting for Prince Charming to do things for you. And what I've learned through life is that it doesn't work like that. We need to take the initiative. Nobody's going to ask you to do things, but you have to stand up and go after what you believe that you want. And again, when we as women, we're supposed to be taking our stages. We're trying, what we do, we have a pull head down syndrome. That is what I call it. If you see another woman, with them, they were supporting each other. If they saw a person who had good leadership skills in whatever area they were good at, that is where they would take that person. As a leader, that is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have a backup of people that are good and better skilled than you. Not look at them and see them as a threat, but you see them and see where they can take you to make sure that you achieve what you need to achieve. And again, I believe that they say that it takes one woman to bring a child into this world, but it takes the whole village to bring that child up. Charity starts at home. When I grew up, it was even though I had neighbors, I looked at them as my mother and my fathers. It was not only the mother that was in the house, I had to answer to them about what I'm doing. And today, that is not how we are. Charity does not begin at home with us, because even our siblings, today, you don't know what they are doing. You don't know where they are. If you're not impacting in your own home, how can you be able to impact the community and the country and the world?
Thank you. My name is Sina Gwebu. Today I am representing Disabled People South Africa. I was listening to the lady who was speaking about volunteerism. I agree with her. And also, when I grew up, there was a thing called Litsima, whereby, the community will go and help the people next door, or even, the community around help each other. But then now, I would say, today is another environment where you see, you're looking at yourself only. You don't care to help your neighbor or even one disabled woman, which you can just leave to work, or even help, to raise the children. But then, I would say, I'm looking at program like this going on, so that, we must start, helping each other or supporting each other. Because I can see now that, when you want to plow back into your community, you have to have love to your community, to start, seeing people on the ground, what are the needs at the ground there. Because if you are up there, not even going to your people down there, you are missing a lot. But then I would like to say, because I was listening to one lady said that about the movement. Last year there was a movement launched in Bloemfontein, whereby different women gathered in Bloemfontein. From Bloemfontein they went to Pretoria. And the movement is still going on, whereby provinces are being launched, as I'm part of that movement, whereby Weekend Limpopo launched. So we appeal to all the women, all races, to come and join that movement, because we do have Jewish women on the movement. We do have all the women who supporting the movement. Thank you very much. But then I'll ask the women to support disabled women as well, because we are an aggressive movement now. We need support. We are not going to say we are going to wait for a plea to be brought to these women, but we are just going to go on and on and on fighting for that plea too.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks, Simon. We'll go to Shani.
I feel very honored to have just sat this morning, first of all looking at the exhibition and really reminiscing about the work that has been done and listening to the stalwarts who are addressing us here today to remind us, I'm not so young anymore, but to remind us about the responsibility that we all have as women. We all have some kind of gift or potential ability, which I believe is important to be shared. When you talk about sharing, this is one way of doing it. But I also think that we all come from somewhere. We are based somewhere, in your locality, the township. We belong to churches, as Brigalia is saying. We belong to Stockfells. We belong in various little groups. And I believe that if we go out of this dialogue today and make a difference in the groupings that we work with or we belong to in our own communities, those small groups, because it's true that we still don't have a good life for all. To look at what it is that we can do in those small groups in our own areas to impact positively. We are in families, we've got daughters that we are raising. How are we raising them? We've got sons, let me emphasize that, whom we are raising, whose behavior is impacting, either positively or very negatively, towards women's ability to become who they are and for women to make a contribution in society. And I'm just saying that I plead with all of us that we go back and be the best we can be where we are, because that is where the people are. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Delphine Saramaga. I'm the director of an organization called Power. And I just want to say that I envy all of you, and I'm jealous of what you've all done. Because today, as an organization, we feel that we're being activists, but we have an issue of activism becoming a bad word, or feminism becoming a bad word. And to a point where when I ask what your occupation is on a form, you write activist, because we'd like to promote that. I think activism is the spirit of what will bring it all together. I agree, I don't think it's about creating just one movement. I think women are not homogeneous, therefore there are many different things we can do as individuals. But I just wanted to say I'm so proud to be in your presence. And I really envy what you did, because I'm not sure that we can do what you've done. Only to say that we'll try and carry on the work that you have done. We'll push ourselves and we'll remain activists, because I believe you were true activists in what you did, and you embody the word of activism, and we will try and follow through with that.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That was the last input. We just have a surprise guest who feels needs to come and greet the women and honor the women. When he comes, we'd like all of us to be seated. And please, those who have flash cameras, please, no flash cameras.
Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela,
How are you? a man doing that? Well, I was forced to sit here. Yes. Oh, I recognize many faces here. Many faces. Some of them were youngsters, when I was active. But now, they are planners of the future of the country. You see how things change. And I never thought that I would be able to sit here and see people who were youngsters at the time when I was president. They were playing around with short dresses and so on. But now they are big ladies. I'm very happy to be here. No, I was just told that I would just come and stand and say hello and then go out. But I have broken that instruction. Isn't that so?
No, you haven't. No, you haven't.
Okay, then. Am I now free to leave?
Thank you very much.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, thank you.
It's fine, buddy, but we're going to leave.
Okay. Okay, no, the young ladies don't want me to stay here for a while. They say I'm not fit to be here. Yes. And you did very well.
And so did you.
I'm happy to hear that. And I hope you will know that these ladies, they played a very important role in the struggle. Some of us can't measure up to the sacrifices they made. Thank you very much. Oh, good. I'm happy to see you. Thank you. Yes? Are you still reporting? Thank you.
Amina, remember the parties we used to have 26 birthdays in your flat
It's a day to be overwhelmed. I'm already overwhelmed. You don't know how overwhelmed I am here. But I'm going to overwhelm myself just a little bit more by asking Mama Graca if she would just say one or two words. You know, because I know if I'm taking a women's movement, I'm talking her, if I'm talking about children, if I'm talking about Africa, if I'm talking about all those things, I know that I'm taking Mama Machel. So one or two words, Mama, please.
I think really I would like to thank the Center of Memory, particularly Moto, for putting together this gathering for us. I'm very humbled by the way I listened and some of the things I learned, others I was reminded, and it took me to be very reflective this morning. And I don't think really I have much to say. Where are you, Mojo? Ah, okay. What I'd like to suggest is that this kind of dialogue should continue. Just the panelists, they didn't have time to tell us what they would have liked to tell us. Maybe we should have just more time without those limits that we start at 10, we have to finish at 12. Because there's one thing which our generation, the old guard to which I belong, we have been failing. It's just to tell the story. Tell the story. You can write a book, but there's nothing which replaces a direct contact and conversation. I must confess that if there is one thing the Nelson Mandela Foundation has failed, is to have allowed people like Walter going without having an opportunity to talk to young people. Just young people. Just to talk to child. To have people like the governor, they are born. And you know, what is part of the history of this country, which is gone with them, will never be able to recapture. Never. It's gone. And because we still have these leaders of ours, I think we should continue to have this kind of conversation. Maybe reshaping it in a different way. Because they also, and me, because I belong to their generation, we need to listen to young people. We need to connect the 2 or 3 generations which are in between and to say, yes, this is how it was. But how is it today? What are the challenges young people are facing? Even with the deep will of recapturing the chain, because I would like us to think of a chain of life, a chain of values which comes from those days until today. How does it work? How does it renew itself, reinvigorate itself, and to be able to face the challenges of today? Because it is true. We sometimes are puzzled on how we have to talk to our children. My family, the small family which I came from before I joined the big family of the Mandelas, but in both my 2 families, I have 3-4 generations. It's easier to talk to Maki or to talk to Olivia, the older ones. We seem to be, but when it comes to the younger ones, it's extremely difficult. I'm not so sure whether I'm being the sort of role model which I should be to them. So we do also have problems. We need to listen to you. We need to try to understand. And we need to connect the chain of life so that we will reinvigorate it and we will make it practical and useful for whatever it is are your needs and your challenges of today. Having said this, I think we need to one of the things which puzzles me is how is it that we came to a situation where we face the levels of violence, but not only violence. I think for me the issue is the sophistication of violence. It's the way that violence is being done against women, against children, against the elderly. If it's a violence because I need a cell phone, okay. I mean, you can do this and take cell phone and go, but you don't need to rape and re-rape and then to humiliate completely another human being. At the end, just to take a cell phone and go out. There's something which is much, much, much wrong than just the need of a cell phone. It is done to elderly, it is done to women, to young women, it is done to children. And we are the women. We are the women, those pillars, the pillars of our families. I'm not taking away the responsibility of men, but I'm saying we, the mothers, the grandmothers, or the great-grandmothers, but the mothers, and there's something which we need to sit down and talk about. What is happening? How is it from my womb I end up with this kind of a child who will look to his sister, to his niece, and do the kind of things which are happening? So I'm saying we do have issues with the political continuity, but I think we have fundamental, very fundamental things which have to do with that small cell of family where we come from. Maybe, Brigalia, I come to you. With all the main hats you have, help us also to talk about family. You know, the thing which has given us the foundations of the values we're talking about, it started in our family, isn't it? Mm. It is exactly. It's my mother, it's my father, it's my uncle. It started in the family. I don't think we will overcome the issue of violence against women, violence against children, without going back and say, what is the family? What is the structure of the South African family? What has gone wrong with that structure of the family? How it has to become, again, the nurturing space, the loving and the caring space where every single human being in this country has reference to before you relate it to the bigger picture of the nation. Mm. And I think we have a fundamental problem there. You know, we can talk of we can perfection if we want the judiciary system. It has to punish, and punish very severely. It has to keep those monsters out of society. It is true. But many other monsters will spring tomorrow if we don't go back to the source of the problem. I'm saying we need to continue this kind of debate. But we need to connect it when we say values. There are big values of a political commitment, of a social, you know, connectivity, which you have to connect it to your community, etc., etc. But they have to be connected and fundamentally linked to that small thing. When at the end of the day, all of us, we go home and we say, this is my family. You know what? Many of our young people, I'm saying in their 40s, in their 30s, in their 20s, they never had that family I'm talking about. It was broken. It was broken by somebody. And because some of them, they're becoming parents without having it themselves, and they can't transmit to others because, yeah. And have you realized how many families are being broken? They're married today, but how many they are broken? If you go to our schools and you ask how many, in certain areas, how many of the kids who are in those schools, they are coming from broken families, you'll be very surprised. And then you realize teachers can't cope. Absolutely, they can't cope. The two fundamental social institutions which give sense of belonging and sense of structure and sense of it's family and school. School cannot do it alone without family. And family cannot do it alone without the school. And that's what I'm saying, that women of and this is absolutely correct, not only for South Africa. It works for any African country today. The challenges we have is exactly that. How do we rebuild this? That anchor, which is our family, and the values. And then you link them with the church, you link them with the values of the constitutions, of human rights, of everything, but sitting there in the anchor of the family. I just wanted to say it has been such a privilege for me, really, to sit and listen. I know all of you, and I have heard you, but it was a humbling experience to sit and listen to you today. And that's what I think we need to continue to do. And eventually, having here two of the stalwarts and two of young people, and shaking the two, you know, and so that they meet somewhere. But thank you for coming. And Moto, thank you, love. Well done.
Thank you very much, Mama, for those very inspiring words. I know that we're short of time, but I'm going to give the panelists a last opportunity if they've got one or two things to say to us as parting words. Then I'll ask Moto to close. But if the panelists, I'll take it back to the panelists. If they have anything.
Say we hope to hear from you very soon. No, quite seriously, with all seriousness, on the way forward, so that this occasion doesn't end here. Maybe you might have some ideas on how we proceed with some of these ideas of continuing the sharing and the dialogue and the learning.
I just want to congratulate my colleagues. A job well done over the years. But we have new challenges in this country, very serious challenges. And I hope we can come to grips with that sooner than later.
I want to just concur with what Madam Graca has said here. Graca has said here, sorry. I wanted to also, for what it's worth, pass on to the young people here, the young women, that if they are in a relationship where they are going perhaps take a partner or get married, whatever they want to do, and then later on they would want to raise a family, I believe in the principle, and it's worked for me, the principle of laying a good foundation in the home, a solid one. That is where it all begins. To build a solid foundation, but while you are building that solid foundation for your children, you have also to have the right values in that home. But besides that, you have to not say, don't do what I do, but do what I say. Which means that as you raise your children, you pass on good examples to them with your own lifestyle. A clean lifestyle, a lifestyle which is principled, because it doesn't mean that if you don't have your own examples, the right ones, if you have wrong examples, you pass on that wrong examples, and hence we have what we have today. Broken up families, like Graca said here, children, the young ones that are married have come from those broken homes. And if we talk to one another, and if we pray together, and if we do things together, in that spirit of having built that good foundation, which will not crack, your children will write to you wherever they are in the world, in boarding school, in universities, they will say to you, I didn't understand what you tried to say so long ago, but now that I'm amongst other children and I see how other people behave, you were not wrong. And I'm grateful for you for having brought me up this way. I'm actually saying that what you have laid there initially, they will build on, because you are not always there to carry a candle for them, but they will have that inside of them, and they will build on what you have laid, this good foundation for them. So I'm saying to the young people there, this is my word of advice for what it is worth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all the participants and my esteemed, very powerful panel. This has been the one platform that has introduced the old words that most of us have forgotten: family values, activism, voluntarism, conversations, sharing, all those things that we've forgotten. And maybe just in each of those words, lies values that we might want to interrogate and bring out and say, what does it mean for our work? And maybe finally to say,
there's a flow of information that probably doesn't happen at the rate at which it ought to happen. Flow of information from professional organizations to communities to government. So those who sit in professional organizations will rattle the statistics. I'll tell you how many children were raped, how many children are doing this. But that information is academic if it does not move to the ground to mobilize communities, because we will not find common threads if we don't understand what the threats are in our communities. And those threats often lie and sit with professional organizations like the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund will tell what's going on in your villages. But that information of what's going on in the village is really of no use to anyone if the women of Hamatabata don't know and the men and the churches don't get the feedback from those organizations that are operational in those communities. So I suppose we need to be crossing lines and ensuring that the Bongi who goes to the Children's Fund is the same one who goes to the church. So I can say to the church, this is what is going on in your communities. I know because I've been there. And what are you doing about it? So I think we need to be having many conversations. And Sister Sophie, thanks for that platform that you introduced of South African Women in Dialogue, because there's a lot of things that we need to be dialoguing about. And I thank you very much for respecting me as your chair today. And I'm looking out for Mutu. Oh, Mutu is already here, to just give us a word of thanks from the foundation. Thank you, Mutu.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to take long, but just really to express a profound sense of humility to have sat in the same room with these ladies. And I think there's no debate, we have to continue this. And how the which and hows will be knocking at your doors again, and hopefully we'd like to thank your time coming out here to share with us. And so we've heeded the call, we've heard you. I'd also like to thank the participants who came out, some at very short notice. There were a lot of people here that I would have loved to hear from the Men's Forum. They were very silent today. Hopefully this is just the initiation of this conversation, and I think the challenges I had is to revisit that art of conversation so that we can link across the different lines and the networks so that this conversation can continue. So thank you very much for all of you. And I think finally, the two boards that you see here, in a little way, we're hoping that as we revisit that art of conversation, is to also create a safe space for that conversation to happen, so that people can truly express what it is that they need to express. So in a very, do you think we can take all of them? Okay. A little token of, from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, from us. Thank you. I don't know if I can do this at the same time. Thank you very much. I don't even know if I would have the level of energy that you have. Thank you so much. Sibongile will come last. Thank you so much for your stories. I really do wish you would have another opportunity to hear some more. Come closer to me. You were very early this morning. To my total embarrassment, you're one of the first people here. Thank you very much. I think I'm missing somebody here, but I'll try to do this. Yes, and she comes back. I hope you don't miss your flight, but I hope you will also honor us with your presence. Thank you so much. Okay, I will do this when she comes back. Mama Graca, there's lots of work to do. Lots of work to do. So as we said, this is just the beginning. Thank you. I was just saying in your absence that you're totally overwhelmed by your presence, and I hope that when you call again, you'll honor us. Thank you very much. And a little token of thank you. from us. Okay. Sibongile, you called, we responded, so over to you. When do we meet again?
Okay, that was, yeah. No, I'm home. Thank you very much, Motsu. I think we're done. I think Motsu will be telling us when we're going to meet again. We move from here to lunch.
I think I'll just hand over. Maybe I just forgot one very important thing. When I acknowledged the man in the room, I forgot to mention the man that pays my salary. Mr. Ahmed Dango, thank you very much for your support. We hope that you'll be there for us along this journey. I'll hand over to Naomi to just tell us what it is that we need to do after this.
I'd like to invite you downstairs to have some food with us, to enjoy some more food and to enjoy networking and to just finalize the conversation, and then we'll take it from here. I'll be in touch.